Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the show. I'm so thrilled to have our great guest, Professor Enrico Baiano, return to the show. And we're going to talk about the harpsichord, and we're going to talk about so much about performance practice, repertoire, and so many great things. And so, Professor Baiano, a man who needs no introduction, very well known in early music. Welcome to the
Hello,
show.
everybody. Hello, everybody.
So, Professor Baiano, Enrico, let's start with some I think there's something we didn't mention in the previous interview, and that I think maybe we touched on it a little bit. It's your teacher, who was a very important figure, uh, a harpsichord professor, Emilia Fadini.
Yes,
And I think you shared a very lovely article about her. And I'm sure people would like to know, who was this person? You mentioned that she might not have been famous in the traditional, conventional route, but nonetheless, she was a very important figure in harpsichord pedagogy and the way and her influence on you.
yes. Emilia Fadini, she died a year ago at the age of 90. And she, mm, besides being a great musician, she was a great woman. And she was one of the first in Italy to start a new course of harpsichord teaching, of early music teaching, and of also teaching in general. Because when she started teaching in the 60s, yes, Emilia Fadini, who died just 1 year ago at the age of 90, has been a very important figure in Italian conservatory and early music teaching, because when she started in the 60s, early music was absolutely not considered important in Italy, early music performance practice. And she was one of the first to study on sources and to study the early performance practices, and also to try to pass all this knowledge not only to early music students, but also to students of modern instruments, because rightly she thought that there was no reason why a pianist shouldn't know the correct performance practice while playing Bach or Scarlatti at the piano. At the time, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, this was frowned upon, also in the early music scene, because it was seen as an extravagance. But now, if you think that early music performance practice for modern instruments is taught at Paris Conservatoire, uh, you realize that she was quite a pioneer. And she not only had a vast knowledge of all the sources and the treatises and was a great interpreter, but she has given us the most authoritative edition of Scarlatti sonatas,
Mm.
which now is arrived at the 10th volume for Ricordi, which is, alas, not very known, because the Hegel edition, it's much more widespread.
Yes.
But her edition, it's much more advanced for the control of all the sources, for the critical apparatus, for the text, and even for the text appearance, which tries to show as best as possible the 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 appearance of Scarlattian text in the sources, which very often has been modernized and normalized by also by good editors, good as Kirkpatrick or Gilbert, sometime shadowing some important feature of the writings of these sonatas.
Can I ask you about those two words you mentioned, modernizing and normalizing? Now, could you go into a little bit more depth into that? Because I
Yes.
think when most people download on IMSLP some Scarlatti
Yes.
sonatas, they say, "Oh, wow, it's all there. I can just download it."
Yes.
But what's the difference between her edition and, for instance, Kirkpatrick?
Well, yes, first of all, there are many, many important main sources for almost each of the sonatas. So sometimes there isn't one established text to be consulted, but more. And when you download from the internet, you just have a sheet of paper without knowing that there are 3, 4, 5, 6 different versions of that sonata. Then there is a particular way in which this music is laid off in the main sources. The main sources are today known as Venice and Parma, because it's where they are staying now. There are two great sets of codices, 15 each, 15 volumes each, copied at the Spanish court during Scarlatti's lifetime, and probably checked by him. And for instance, one important feature is this, that all the music which is higher than treble C, it's written on the upper staff, on the upper stave.
Oh,
And all the music which is written, which is lower than treble C, it's in the lower stave. And this means that sometimes that it isn't clear which hand plays the notes, and this makes things more difficult at times to understand, but also gives more liberty for the performer to understand how to divide, how to decide, how, for instance, to find inner melodies in the accompaniment, for instance. Then there are particulars like the lack of rests very often, which are not missing rests, but simply refer to that that liberty in Baroque music, in which sometimes you can add notes, you can hold a note according to your own decision. There are some signs which are not easy to understand, which are not very often kept into the modern editions. And then there are the dozens or thousands, I'd say, thousands of little strange particulars which can't be disposed of so easily by simply correcting them, that should be considered by each player. So this is, of course, an edition which is not made for quick and lazy sight readers, but it's for scholars, for students who won't really go through the Scarlatti text. For instance, Scarlatti very often breaks the symmetry between musical sentences. So there is one less measure, half less measure, and sometimes even in Hegel edition, you find that this symmetry has been restored. And adding in one bar, one measure, or that half measure missing, that they thought was missing. But this is too easy to do. If one analyzes Scarlatti's reasoning, musical reasoning, one understands that he breaks symmetry. He undermines the logic and the symmetry of the normal European musical discourse. And only at the end of his output, we see that in the last sonatas, he goes for symmetry and for good proportion between parts. So it's a latest achievement, but something he was not interested in his years of his maturity.
I want this now. Just talking to you about that makes me realize that, oh my goodness, we could probably spend 2 hours on just the interpretation of all the sources, the manuscript. It's so interesting. So I do want to dive a little bit deeper. We have actually prepared many examples for today's interview, but let's spend just a little bit more time on that, Scarlatti, because that was so interesting. Wasn't Scarlatti actually published like in a proper edition? And so why do people need multiple sources if we have an actual published edition?
Well, only the 30 sonatas of the esercizi for clavicembalo were published during Scarlatti lifetime. They were published in London. But the interesting fact is that 11, those were published in 1738 or 39. But it's interesting to observe that the first of the books of the Venice, which was copied in 1742, contains 11 of these esercizi in a different version, and it's in an early version. And also other esercizi are contained in other sources like Paris Arsenal or Turin, and there are all variants of the same of the author himself. So Scarlatti was a great improviser, and it's very, very likely that the version we have of sonatas is just one of the versions he used to play, and he had to write down something, but he wasn't always sure to replay in the same particulars, the same number of bars, and so on. And during exactly contemporarily at the publication of the esercizi, there was a pirate edition of the same pieces made by Thomas Rosengrave, a formerly great friend of Scarlatti's, who probably was jealous that an edition of Scarlatti has been done without referring to him. So he made this new edition, this pirate edition. And at the same time, in Paris, during the years, appeared six little volumes with Scarlatti's sonatas, for great part of the esercizi plus other sonatas, also there with variants. So probably since Scarlatti has been to Paris, and since many people went to see Scarlatti and got manuscript copies of his sonatas, Europe was scattered around with the manuscript copies of these sonatas, very different from each other. And that's why the situation is sometimes it's very, very tricky for the editor. Poor Emilia Fadini spent her whole life doing that, and she almost nearly lost her sight to do that. And probably
you said authoritative, right? So has she solved it? Has she found the exact, I guess, or really the final edition of the pieces? as Scarlatti
Well,
intended?
it's finite but not final, because new sources come to light. For instance, for the esercizi, new sources has come to light in the last 10 years, for instance. So at this moment, this is the most authoritative edition because it's the edition which contemplates the vastest number of sources. Of course, no edition can be complete and exhaustive and definitive.
Right.
Also, because for each sonatas, really, there are always doubts and there are possibilities. And then, of course, the scholars sometimes do not agree if consider that source as the main source or that other. So for that sonata, somebody can think that Parma is the principal one. Somebody else can think this is Münster or Venice or Vienna. If you think that even esercizi, it's filled up with typos, with misprints, and sometime I saw her and Marco Moiraghi, these great scholars who helped there with the ninth volume and the ninth and 10 volumes. Once I saw them struggle with one single note in esercizi, trying to understand if it had to be considered a typo, a misprint, or simply one of Scarlatti peculiarity. And sometimes really you take a chance. It's a risk when you decide, okay, this is to be corrected. And sometimes I've been also discussing with them 2 hours telephone at telephone, and without at the end of the conversation I was more confused than before.
Let me ask you about the so if somebody wanted to play Scarlatti, what editions would you recommend? The Fadini edition? Is that easily available?
Yes, I'd recommend the Fadini edition and a bit of patience in getting in on the internet, because it's not very easy, unfortunately.
Would you be able to mention specific examples that perhaps people who play Scarlatti would be shocked or surprised that are actually the wrong note? Or is there a certain section that are famous?
Yes, for instance, the Sonata K17, there is this famous case in the second part where a bar has been added in more late sources and retained in Hegel edition, for instance. And the same sonata appears in the 10th volume of Fadini edition in 2 different versions. One of the esercizi, one of the Arsenal of Paris, with many differences. Another important one is the K9, the very famous K9, which also there appears in, if I'm not mistaken, 3 different versions. And also in the critical report at the end of the book. The critical report, it's almost the half of the book. There are, for each sonatas, there are a lot of observation, because sometimes it's not simply the simple report of the differences or the discrepancies between the sources, but there is also a discussion and a photographic reproduction of the passages, so that the student can look at it and try to develop her own idea. Because I think the good also of this edition, it's the idea that each of us has to try her own decision, not simply to play what somebody else laid in front of me, of you. You see,
What are the most like?
there
Go ahead.
is another example in K24 where Scarlatti wrote a bar. It's it's in 4/4 time, but there is a bar which is only 2/4 of two yes, 2/4 of, and so starting from Czerny, everybody has tried to fill this bar up. And it's strange that even in a Hegel edition, which should be an Urtext edition, we find this. Simply, Scarlatti didn't care if one bar wasn't regular, because in his mentality, the bar lines are still considered in the 17th century way. They are simply visual divisions to help the reading, but do not have necessarily a rhythmic value. So
Oh,
we should
wow.
simply follow him and try to do what he suggests.
It's incredible. I mean, what an insight. I mean, could you expand a little bit on that idea that the bar is not this strict metric counting of the entire piece?
Yes, this becomes like that in the 18th century, of course. But we should remember that Scarlatti was born in 17th century, and he also had his upbringing in a musical environment where the Italian tradition of 16th and 17th century was revered and very thoroughly studied, especially Frescobaldi. So when we talk about sonata, we think immediately of the classic sonata, but simply in 16th and 17th century, sonata means something which is played and not sung. Sonata is simply a piece, and it's almost the same that as toccata. Toccata in the Italian tradition of the 16th and 17th century, it's a free improvised piece whose main characteristic is the great variety and continuous changing of moods, of themes, of ideas, of character. And so it's absolutely normal to change mood, to change tempo, to change character, to change meter during the course of the piece, even several times in the same page. And because of this, the accents of the bars of the music fall not regularly in the bar line after the bar lines, because this is very clear when you look at sources in the 16th and 17th century, when you see that measures are very different in length according to the kind of values which are in them. For instance, a ricercare written with whole and half notes has very big measure with 2 or 3 whole notes values, whereas for instance, madrigale passaggiato with a lot of semiquavers or demi-semiquavers has measures with a lot of notes, but actually for only 3 or 4 quarter notes value in each. And it's simply a question. Sometimes when you play with another instrument, basso continuo and violin, for instance, violin has a certain number of measures, and the continuo player has a different number because he has got less notes, and then each measure contains much more notes. So normally when we rehearse with a violin, with a recorder, we don't say, okay, let's restart from bar 17. We say, okay, let's restart from tactus 17. So a
Oh,
tactus
wow.
is normally a whole note
Wow.
value. And so, and this is still valid at the beginning of the 18th century. And in all the important composers, this should be kept in mind, because sometimes you should go farther beyond the bar line with your accentuation, your stressing. I, I admit it's not easy, but it's not impossible. It's just a question of practice
Oh, that's
and
so
simply of.
incredible. I mean, just the way of looking at music is so completely different. What are the implications in terms of the interpretation?
Yes, this means that, for instance, in a Scarlatti sonata, very often, also if it's written allegro at the beginning, or presto, or andante, the real tempo, it's not shown until, for instance, the second half of the first part of the sonatas. Very often, the sonata starts with a simple sketch, with something which has the same purpose of the Frescobaldi toccata opening, just to show the key, to far intendere il tuono, to let the tone heard, understood. And so sometimes it's just like an improvisation. That's a little idea, a little motive will never appear again. It's just a gambit,
Mm.
so to say. And sometimes he starts and stops several times at the beginning of a sonata. And then you see that the real presto, the real allegro comes only when the new key is finally stated, after 30, after 40 bars. And sometimes, anyway, during the course of the sonata, something happens, the passage to minor key, or a new idea, a new theme, a new character, which forces you to change, to adapt your tempo, your articulation, your declamation. But actually, Beethoven himself said, when one asked about the metronome of a piece of him, of his, he gave a number that said, this is just for the first 2 bars. You see, you can't put metronome to the feelings. So it depends. So
Right. Okay, I have a very important question on tempo. What you said has just blown my mind. So, if you see allegro, how would you teach a student how fast an allegro is? And is an allegro in the 18th century the same as an allegro in the 16th or 17th century? How do you? And obviously, in the modern age, if something was expected to be slower in the past, do we play it faster today, even for a modern audience? Or if we are to play it, or has Allegro always been the same?
well, normally before the invention of metronome, the heartbeat was taken as a model.
Okay.
So, and actually, each period tends to think that earlier music was slower.
Mm.
because at mid 18th century, I don't remember who, but a French musician said that old people said that Lully operas lasted much longer than they were young. So
Mm.
also in 18th century France, they thought that 17th century music was slower than they thought, than really. So, and also we know that Bach loved very, very lively tempos.
Mm.
And if we look at Beethoven and Chopin metronomes, they are absolutely,
Mm.
um,
Very big numbers.
yes, big numbers. But I think, coming back to the question, how fast an allegro should be, I think it's music who asks for it. If you can, um, first of all, if you are able to understand all the nuances, all the articulation, all the tiniest particular which are in the music, you have to adopt a tempo which makes you able to express them and the audience to hear them,
Mm.
because sometimes you play it perfectly, but so fast that the audience can't really grasp. It's too fast for it.
Mm.
Then there is the typical Italian attitude of the singing allegro,
Mm.
that Italians can be also in allegro in presto. They are never mechanic. They are never rigid and soulless, but they are always singing and always expressive. So sometimes you really need a prestissimo, but even a sonata prestissimo has got moments in which a certain relaxation is called for.
Mm.
So it depends. And I think the most important is not to think that the way you start is the way you will go until the end, because
Mm.
you never know what's going to happen during the course of the piece. Also because there are so many implication of theatrical style, of recitative, of improv, or folk music, Italian or Iberian folk music, so many elements. And the influence of Italian toccata makes Scarlatti able to mix together the most different things without any trouble. And since there are so many things thrown together, for each of them you need its own tempo. Um, Beethoven always said that each theme has got its own tempo,
Mm.
and the same is with Scarlatti, and I dare say also with Bach and others. Also, the idea that Bach and German music should be so stiff, so rigid, I really don't see really the ground for that. Of
Mm.
course, a fugue can't be played like a free recitativo. Nevertheless, being strict, mechanical, and only rhythmic, thinking that only the sound, the beauty of sound, and the perfection of counterpoint and
Mm.
polyphony, it's what made that music. For me, it's a bit an impoverishment. I invent my English, sorry.
No, no,
Of
that's
the
a real
music.
thing. So are you talking about there's a coldness, right? If it's too mechanical.
Sometimes, yes, sometimes there is the idea that being Bach, you can't be too expressive and too subjective. And the same in the same cliche goes Scarlatti, which is always brilliant and superficial. For
Mm.
instance, Scarlatti can be as deep and as uh, tormented and complicated like the German composer, simply because a great composer is a universe in himself, in
Yes,
herself. So
absolutely. I have one more question. We haven't even gone to our examples because this is so fascinating. Final part of this, I want to ask you about ornamentation. And I know that in, for instance, certain treatises, they give you exactly, oh, if you see this, you play that. If you see a trill, this is this, you play that. But is it so strict like that, or is there more interpretation of what a turn could be, what a mordant can be, what a trill can be? Is it up to the interpreter, or do you feel like it has to be a certain way?
Hmm. Well, we should first um, make clear two different kinds of ornamentation. There is the small ornamentation, which is the ornaments represented with signs, by signs, the serpentine, the gruppetto sign, the grace note, um, which symbolize a certain group of notes already defined. And there is also the great ornamentation, which is the so-called diminution, which is, for instance, the embellished melodies like the second movement of Italian concerto of Bach, of many, the Vivaldi transcription by Bach, the adagios, where there are many connecting figures between the main notes, which can't really be symbolized with a sign. For the small ornamentation, it's important to say that only the French and the French and the French style composers used a very specialized system. But the French and all the treatises says that, of course, the table gives a very schematical realization, but the execution should be always singing. For instance, Couperin says, although the trills are written all in equal value, you should start them slower than you continue them. So since a trill is kind of the realization at the keyboard of a messa di voce, of a crescendo, so it seems natural to start it slower and then speed it up a bit.
Wow.
This also depends. This also depends on the character of the piece. Of course, the trills in a very languid or sad melody are to be played in a different way than trills in a lively and brisk piece, of course. And small ornamentation was very seldom written down by Italians, Spanish, and by composers who wrote in their style. So they gave some indication in their treatises. For instance, Tomás de Santa Maria explains what the redoble is, what the quiebro sencillo e reiterado are, and where to put them, for instance, on each half note, for instance, or each second quarter note. But they don't give very, very precise. They leave it to you. Also, because in polyphony, of course, sometimes you can't put the little shake in the same place everywhere, because the fingers are very busy. So, and Italians, and especially, invented the art of diminution, and they took for granted that, of course, you had to learn all the art of diminution, of improvisation, and then to do your own embellishment while playing. Italians used to put the sign, the letter T, which means tremoletto. But tremoletto means a short shake either with upper note or with lower note, normally starting from the principal note. But sometimes the T is put on a group of notes, which is not simply the alternation of two sounds, but there are more sounds involved. So there are hundreds of examples of this in Claudio Merulo, in Frescobaldi, in Rossi. So sometimes T simply warns us, okay, here there is something to do. Do something, a trill, a gruppetto, a little turn in some way, a little passage. It's not always predictable, and it also depends on the character of the piece. So, for instance, Scarlatti in this is still completely in the 17th century tradition, because in his sources we find only T or TR, which always stands for tremoletto, and also TRE or tremulo. And this tremulo is the great trouble of keyboard players, because you never know exactly what to do. For me, it's very amusing, because I amuse myself doing it in the strangest ways, also because it's the tremulo indication is found in the
Can you demonstrate what that would be sound like?
Well, for instance, there are also examples we have to show later on.
Okay. Sorry, I just got excited.
But for instance, there is this sonata, the sonata key 119. Then this is the opening. This is a very nice theme and will never come back. This jumping higher and higher, like a challenge to you. No, let's see who can jump higher. And then in the second half of the first part, the new theme in A minor comes, and then there is this passage. With these clusters, which have got their own meaning. We talk about them maybe later on. And it's interesting that in the right hand, it's written tremulo nell'ala mire, means tremulo on the A. So how to do this? So at the beginning, one can do a trill. But I think then it's much more fun starting to do this. So because this is a piece in Andalusian style. It's a jota, and so this really recalls the sound of castanets and also the beating, the stamping of the shoes on the wooden. Yes, yeah. It's typical, no? Yeah. Also, the accelerando is typical of certain passages of these folk music exhibitions. But for instance, in other places, it can be, there is another sonata, the preceding one, the former one. on this note, he writes on up of them, he writes Tremulo and added little tr close to each note to be sure we understand which part is to do has to do the tremolo. So once can be, since this little theme, this is repeated several times, both in D major and in A major. So for instance, once can be or for instance, when in A major, I do once like this. This actually, there is an Italian musician, Pasquali, Niccolò Pasquali, who settled down in Edinburgh, who in the second part of the 18th century wrote a treatise, and he talks of the of the tremolato, and it says it's launching these three fingers. Where is the camera? These three fingers. Now he publishes his treatises in 1765. So of course it's after Scarlatti's death. But why not? Why not for once? I mean, it calls for something peculiar, brilliant, and somehow amusing to the listener, to the audience.
That is so incredible. What I'm so mind blown that the fact that the Italians did not write down much. There's so much that they, in fact, expected you to be if you were a polished, finished musician, to know when to put in the diminutions, to know when to put in the ornaments. It was expected, and that is so interesting to know that was part of that performance culture. It's really incredible. I mean, I could listen to you play. In fact, I think let's keep that going, because this is going to really be great for the listeners. We have 5 groups of examples of really wonderful things to demonstrate. So why don't we start straight away, Enrico, with the first group, the Neapolitan predecessors. So why don't you just give us a lead in? What do you mean by that?
Yes, because one of the main things which strikes about Scarlatti is that he looks like something completely inexplicable and isolated. But actually, he's exactly one of the a descendant of a long tradition which established itself at the end of 16th century in Naples, with Jean de Mac, Giovanni Maria Trabaci, Ascanio Maione, and Scipione Stella, who were the first to create a new language, very characteristic of Neapolitan music for its daring technical difficulties, which are equaled only by Elizabethan contemporary music, a daring technical instrumental difficulties, which is equaled only by the music of Elizabethan musician at the same time. Then the quest for chromaticism, for strange and abstruse harmonies, for strange and new ornaments, and a new way of have the instrument singing. I think especially Ascanio Maione gives us a new way of how of make harpsichord sing. Maybe because he was a great harp player as well, because there was also a very important harp tradition in Naples. Come from the Spanish influence.
Mm.
We know that harp was very important in Spain. So, for instance, this first example is the opening of the Capriccio sopra Re fa mi sol of Jean de Mack. Jean de Mack was a Flemish composer, but he settled down in Naples, and really he became, we could see, the first great Neapolitan. And this is the beginning. So you see already from this how peculiar it is. First of all, you see this opening with magniloquent chords will become kind of a visiting card of the Neapolitan school, because very often we'll see pieces which start like this, and it's interesting to say that these musicians were, many of them were at the court of Carlo Gesualdo da Venosa, whose music we know for being particularly
Chromatic.
chromatic. And Carlo Gesualdo stayed in Ferrara for 2 years with his musicians, and the young Frescobaldi was there. So Frescobaldi was 13 and 14 at that period. So Frescobaldi was in part influenced by the Neapolitan musicians, who were themselves influenced by the Ferrarese school also. There is always a two ways exchange, of course. And then we see at the third, so we will not call them bar or measures, we'll call them caselle. At the third casella, we see sbalzo, which means jump. So you see, we are at the end of 16th century. This is, I think, 1594, maybe. And this figure must have appeared so particular to the composer himself, at the point that he underlined it with this word sbalzo. And so several Neapolitan composers will then use this idea of sbalzo, of the jumping from one side to another of the keyboard for expressive purposes, and also just to show virtuosity. So this is, for instance, where we can find Scarlatti's love for the daring jumps and hand crossing, which are also a kind of representation also of the dance, because they oblige the player at strange movements, sometimes unnecessary ones, which imitate the whirling of the dancers. Then we see here at the second line this strange little embellishment. And going down, we see another thing they loved a lot, the harsh dissonances, obtained with all licit counterpoint movement. So they stretch the counterpoint rules until obtaining this. Sometimes there are also worse examples.
You said licit, so meaning that the contrary directions are all correct, but
Yes.
it's the intervals that are extremely dissonant.
Yes. And they fall in a part which receives a great stress from this. It should be a weaker stress, a weaker part of the bar or the measure. Then we see this is capriccio sopra re fa mi sol. So, and we see at the C at the second line here how the Mach uses this little motto in strict imitation between the part. And then further on, you see it becomes a stampede, I call it. And you see,
it sounds like they're having a lot of fun.
Yes. And then if you go down, you see where this ends up with a passage. Remember that we are at the end of the 16th century. And I have seen such things only in John Bull or in Giles Farnaby or other parts. And then here, the conclusion, you see at the end, there is another sbalzo, daring sbalzo.
That's insane. That's wonderful.
It's really something not often seen at the end of the 16th century.
This guy is amazing. Can you say his name again?
Jean de Mac, Italianized in Giovanni de Mac.
Incredible.
He married a Neapolitan woman, and the wedding contract said that he was never to never leave Naples. Otherwise, he would have lost the citizenship and also all the money of the wedding.
Oh my goodness. Okay, let's go on to number 2.
Number 2 is always Jean de Mac. This is the capriccetto, and this figure we will find very often in Neapolitan music and in Scarlatti. then there is a variation on the same.
So good.
So you see also.
And by the way, you're playing. This is off the cuff. It's great. Wow.
So there was this French gentleman who came to Naples in 1632, and he said that Neapolitan music was completely different from Roman music, because in Rome music is very serious. It's very refined. In Naples, it's something, he says it's characteristic for thousands of fugues, pauses, and reprises. Fugues are themes in the time vocabulary. So he says that the Neapolitan musicians do not observe at all the regularity, passing from very fast to very slow, to very high to very low, to very loud to very soft. And there is a certain melancholy in them always. He says it's not very cheerful, actually. And it's something, Neapolitan style, it's something between the Sicilian air and the French air, which is particular. And he says that in Neapolitan, all have got a grain of folly. And they are very, very like the Gascons. I don't know how you say this in English, Gascons, the inhabitants of Gascony. And I think he really has the point, because you see here, it starts with this, then stops and goes with another thing. This is a passage called durezze e ligature, which means dissonances and suspensions, and is a genre with also the consonanze stravaganti, extravagant harmonies, which has been actually invented by Jean de Mack, and which become one of the most
copied
styles in the 17th century.
Wow.
So there is this part of toccate di durezze e ligature, and then this ricercare with two fughe, with two subjects. When you see in the second part, you see there is chromaticism. Where is it? It's so small I can't see. For instance, there is the sharp in one note, while it's here, for instance, in the, yes, you can see it.
Yeah.
Yes, there in the line below, in the line at the third measure, at the first measure,
yep.
Yes, here you see, and at the third measure, there is also the same F sharp and F natural, which is quite normal in the Renaissance music, but they do it normally in a less harsh way. And then also the improvising part at the end of the section. So you see really 1,000 fugues, rests, stop, and reprise. Like this gentleman was Jean-Jacques Bouchard,
Great.
who wrote a journal of his journey to Italy.
Shall we go on to
yes,
this one here?
Yes, these are
Sbalzi.
Examples of Sbalzi. So another toccata of Mack, which is... and is still nothing particular. This is Trabaci. Then Giovanni Picchi it's a composer of north of Italy, and this piece, which is found in the Fitzwilliam Virginal book, is the one of the very few examples I found of this kind of things in Italian music before the 18th century. Sorry for the wrong notes. And then Scarlatti, you see Scarlatti at the end of this very challenging sonata, not satisfied having tortured the poor player with all sorts of crossing hands, of double notes, of octaves. At the very end, you see there is that C minor arpeggio, and the last note must be played by right hand. D, the letter D means dritta, which in Old Italian means right hand. So and
Spalsy.
yes, it's very dangerous. But you must say that when you play it in the easiest way, you lose the excitement, the sense of danger. Right. And of course, okay, there is also the Sonata K29, which is all to be played cross hands for the whole piece. And you can easily play it normally, exchanging hands. But then all the challenge and the danger is lost. Ecco, the next example, you remember the beginning of that capriccetto. Now, here I reported some later development of this figure. So this is Giovanni Salvatore, which is the second generation of Neapolitans, the mid 17th century. Then the beginning of Alessandro Scarlatti. And then
so those two wavy lines are meant to be
it's just because I didn't write the whole passage.
Oh, okay.
It's my my expedient, because it was a long passage with 6 bars, so it was too long. And then the young Scarlatti, presumably in F sharp minor, he writes this. So probably the first notes are to be played an octave higher. But since most of the keyboards of the time didn't have the upper C sharp, so he probably wrote it an octave lower.
So we still have 2 more pages of the Neapolitan predecessors. This is his father now.
Yes, his father, and Sinfonia Quinta. This is a concerto grosso for strings and 2 recorders. And it's interest, then the next example, it's Scarlatti K1, Esercizi 1, which is so we see he just uses it as a opening gambit, and then he goes elsewhere. It also uses it to open the second part. But so this shows us that Scarlatti is by no means an isolated composer who took out of the hat strange things. He's absolutely the the grandson of Jean de Mac, Giovanni Maria Trapace, Ascanio Maione. Ascanio Maione, I'd like to point out this. There is a passage in one of his toccatas which is exactly the same, like the harp cadence in the scene of Orfeo in Monteverdi's Orfeo. It's incredible. Now it's difficult to know if Maione took from Monteverdi, because his book is of the early 17th century, or Monteverdi, or was simply a figure much used, very much used in the harp practice, because also for instance, the figure this we find in Orfeo and also in Maione and also in Jean de Mac. So difficult to say if somebody of them has the primacy of it, or was just a figure shared by everybody at the period. But it's interesting to see all this, how intermingling it's all this.
Right. So let's go on to the final one, which is you already played. So that's the
yes.
Okay. Example. Okay, so this is now group 2, which you have called Sonata openings.
Yes, because I say that the sonata has its roots in the Italian toccata of the 17th century. So the toccata normally starts with a part in improvised style, which just serves as an introduction and as also to prepare the audience to the tone of the composition. So, and Scarlatti very often opened the sonata with a very simple gesture. This is so you see, the first bar aren't really a theme, are just something to put the hands on the keyboard. So also for this, or this.
Would you call these gambits?
Well, just this is Dean Sutcliffe idea, also the stampede, just like a way of starting. Gambit, it's a chess, it's a chess way of start the game.
Yeah.
But interesting is the K33.
Okay.
Down there, which is, you really see, it's really like an improvisation. And you see, the real sonata started here. And interesting that in one of the sources, the sonata starts here without this improvisation, which is found in the Venice book. And also this is the typical Italian trill in the Monteverdi and Caccini style, called ribattuta. namely trill starting with dotted notes and then accelerating. So for instance, I don't count exactly the number of times I'm doing this. I simply accelerate. Also, in the previous line, I don't know if I play 4 times the arpeggio. I go on until it's so fast I have to go on with that scale.
It's so funny.
Because
Don't we know that when piano students see a repeated motive, the piano teacher is always, did you do the right number? And then they say, oh, I don't know.
Yes. And also that when there are repeated models, you have to play absolutely once forte and second time piano, always with this horrible echo effect, which is so boring, too overused.
Wonderful. This is awesome. So let's do another one. I see 104.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh God. This I haven't prepared yet, but this we see. This is more interesting because really this is the kind of sonata which starts with stop and go, continuous stop and go, and you never know. It starts on the tonic and ends on the tonic, then restarts on the tonic and stops again on the tonic, then on the tonic by the minor mode, stopping on the dominant, then again on the dominant. So you wonder, okay, but where does he want to go? There is also another explanation, since many sonatas evoke the dance. So this section with open and stop can be simply section of the dance, which in the Spanish dance, there is this concept of the bien parado, which means that at the end of all a choreography, you stop suddenly in an elegant pose, and the firmer you are, the better. And if you do it perfectly, the audience will applaud and will exclaim, "Bien parado!" So also this could also, the frequent stopping can be also the evoking of a dance. So I try to play this.
Wow.
And then from
so good.
From the next passage on, the sonata started, doesn't stop anymore. So it's very interesting because you see, I had to change tempo.
Yeah.
And then yes, normally it's played all allegro or fast from the beginning to the end.
Right.
But I think the character of this, which is this opening, we doesn't know where to go, also requires for longer stops than the written notes would suggest.
That's incredible stuff. And here's the last one.
Yes, this is the opposite. Scarlatti starts by repeating obsessively the same thing. I played straight, but I think, for instance, that repetition could mean different stresses. For instance, sbalzo.
Right.
We are back at the Mac.
Exactly.
And note another place, another particular. Here we have a dominant 7 chord, but then there is no resolution. So, for instance, Longo and other editors felt the necessity for
corrective.
Instead, Scarlatti very often leaves dissonance without resolution, and it's not, he's not forgetting anything. He simply wants this tension not to be resolved. For instance, in the Sonata K208, the famous A major, one of the most beautiful pieces of the 18th century. The end of the first part is
it's a huge chord at the end, right?
Yes. Two single notes and very long. It's a whole note in a slow piece, which are quite embarrassing because you stay there. Oh my God, what have I to do here? And but the beautiful, maybe is to leave the sounds on and then let them go one after the other, and then it's time to start again.
Exactly. Now we have come to the end of sonata openings, and our next section is opera. And we have here Leonardo Vinci, not Da Vinci, Leonardo Vinci.
No, it's Vinci. It's Leonardo Vinci. Yes, because I think normally the importance of opera in understanding the music of 17th, 18th, and 19th century is overlooked. And the opera was really the main idea of almost all composers. And also, if you think that music has always been thought like a song text. So principally a vocal melody and a vocal melody with a text. So instrumental music should be thought always like a melody with an implied text. We know that there are many musical figures invented just to represent and to aid, to help the expression of the words. So when words are not there, there are the figures and there are the rememberings kind of code, which is in our imagination, and which is today still active, because nobody would like marcia funebre for his wedding, for instance. You wouldn't like this is more right for a funeral or for a wedding if you are very have got great sense of humor, I'd say. So, and in all music, and especially in all Italian music, the importance, the implication of theater music, it's very, very present. Now, this area Sole sordo le nesco la mare, it's not only in this opera Lo Giocate Fausa, which means the false blind, it's also a popular Neapolitan song. And I can't sing it because my voice is a pity. I only play. Why I report this example? Because we have the famous K9, Esercizi 9 of Scarlatti, which has the same air and the same character. And it's interesting, it's written in Esercizi, I forgot to write it here, but it's written allegro. And there is also the source of I don't remember if Arsenal or Turin, which is not in 6/8, but rather in 12/8. And it's sometimes I think it's allegro allegrissimo. So normally this has been much damaged by the 19th century tradition, which transformed it into a pastorale in E minor by Hans von Bülow. And so also today, many pianists and harpsichordists play very, very tender. But the air I quoted a few minutes ago says that the medley, this kind of fruit typical of south of Italy, are very bitter when they are not ripe, but if you wait, you will eat them. And so are women. And when you first try to court them, they will be bitter and will reject you. But with time and with caressing and being gentle with them, you will conquer them. So it's a mid-character piece. This kind of pieces which kind of teach a lesson, a moral lesson. This was intended to say, don't rush up, don't be too in a hurry with your girl. Wait for her time, and you will have the best of her. For instance, there is another air of Pergolesi, always in D minor. So you see, it's always D minor, always in 12/8 tempo.
Oh, this is the wrong one.
No, it's not there. It's
Yeah.
not there.
Okay.
So that's, I think, this sonata, it's simply a quotation on this kind of air. And also, you remember, in Vinci, there was here in the Scarlatti sonata. Sorry, I make you jump up and down.
Oh, it's the
you
easiest work to do. Don't worry.
Yes.
It's so easy for me.
You come back to, you can, here we have a, so the character of this sonata, I think, could be this. So it's also this
not a
kind
funeral march.
not really a tender, slow piece, but like something with humor and with this kind of detached expression of somebody who is saying a truth, telling a truth of life to the audience.
It really makes sense. And here's not the Pergolesi that you mentioned earlier, but a different one, but from his very famous
Yes,
opera.
and I quote this. This is the famous A Serpina penserete. Here, Serpina is trying to move the emotions of Uberto. She wants to be married by him, and says, one day, once, you will think of me and will say, once she was very dear to me. Poor thing, she was very dear to me. But then she talks to the public, to the audience, and see, I'm succeeding in my thing. You see, he already starts to cry. He is falling in my trap. And do with this. And also, I replay this. And later on, you'll see why. Now, there is that Sonata of Scarlatti in the next example, which to me, it's really a rethinking of this same piece. You see, it's the same situation, the same key, the same, and then look at this passage. This was Pergolesi. And this. And the sonata alternates this slow part with the 3 octaves part. And then there is a coda. This is kind of end of the scene. And I think also this is quoted in another sonata, the one of the next example. Here, you see, this sonata starts in this, it's in C major, it starts like this. Then the second idea So you see, it's quite a... It's an almost perfect quotation of Pergolesi, I think. And I must say, okay, I gave the example of Pergolesi, but there are so many Neapolitan operas with that kind of situation. So the opera, it's another important element in Scarlatti's music.
And that's a good way to finish the section on opera. We're running out of examples, and this has been so fantastic. We have example group 4, which is interruptions.
Yes, because always talking of the derivation from Italian toccatas. So Scarlatti hasn't got any problem in interrupting the course of a piece with something completely new, completely stranger, and which disappears as nothing, if nothing had happened. So, for instance, this is the Sonata, the Sonata K 213, which starts like a normal minuetto. Well, let's see, the beginning is very free. It's the usual improvisation. Then it goes on, and the first part ends in the most normal way. Then you turn the page and you think, oops, I turned 2 pages instead of 1.
That section that you labeled B, where did that come from?
Yes, it's the chords of the Spanish guitar, which we deal with later on.
That's incredible.
But he simply throws them there, and then it's your business how to deal with them.
That's incredible. And now we have another interruption.
Yes, these sonatas is the K 394, and we have also a very interesting report of a performance made by Brahms of this sonata. Brahms was greatly fond of Scarlatti and was thinking of doing an edition of Scarlatti sonatas, and he had this manuscript source, which now is at the Gesellschaft der Musikfreunde in Vienna, which also he annotated in the sides of the pages with something. And a friend of him wrote him to say, it's incredible, that sonata, Scarlatti can do things that other people wouldn't dare. That arpeggio section is so wild. And because the interesting in Scarlatti is that actually these things happen, but they do not destroy the unity of the piece. So this is a Spanish sonata, which starts with typical Spanish improvisation. Then it goes on and finishes in the first half normally in B minor.
Woo!
So much for forbidden parallel fifth. So you see, apart for the complete strangeness of these arpeggios, which interrupts completely the piece, when I recorded this sonata, I think that at the moment of the editing, the technician thought this was the beginning of a new piece, so put a new track. And then it's absolutely incredible the way after these arpeggios, he starts in F minor, goes to E flat major, and then from there, without you know how, you find yourself back in E minor, and you don't know how. And this reminds me of another gentleman in Naples, Charles Burney, the founder of the modern musicology, who was in the 60s of the 18th century in Naples. And he reports that once he was in his hotel room, and suddenly he heard street musicians playing, and they were playing going from A major to E flat major, and then from E flat major to another strange key very far, but in such a natural and easy way that he wasn't able to reconstruct. And so also this demonstrates that Scarlatti, he's a genius, but is by no means an isolated man who out of the blue keeps it and takes the things out of the hat. I also, in parentheses, I think that today the Neapolitan music are the beautiful Neapolitan songs, which are actually like 19th century opera arias, romances. So, and there is no trace, no track of this kind of strange music Charles Burney spoke about. So I think the 19th century opera passed over the music and cut away a lot of things, I think.
Enrico, do you know at the turn of the 20th century, when you had silent films, you often had an organist behind the projector, and he would be following the music, and
Yes.
it would be in a kind of a schizophrenic way as well. Like if something
Yes.
fast is happening, he'd change, and if the lady on the screen has a very beautiful and soft scene, he suddenly changes into a soft scene. And probably, I mean, I'm not sure if that's a similar parallel, but it's like someone who's thinking fast on the spot.
Well, you won't believe it, but this is exactly what I suggested many times. I tell to students, it's a pity, me, myself, but also you, we have never watched the silent films where the pianist or the organist improvising music under following the scene, because I really think when you accompany recitativo, for instance, you have to do exactly this. And when you play this music, you must really be like this. That's why I'm so a great enemy of simply sticking to note, to tempo, and to the strict rhythm, to what you just see there. Because what you see there is just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
And then you have to comment, to report, to underline, to leave yourself, and to pass to the audience in this way. And so you are perfectly right. And in all the interviews I saw you made with other scholars, I always admired your questions and your consideration, because I must say I'm learning a lot from you. I must say this, and it's not not just to being
I was just going to say,
kind.
Enrico, this has been so incredible because you're playing all these incredible examples. This might be one of the best episodes ever because of just what we're hearing, and the way you explain it is exactly the kind of things we need to hear, because if we didn't have those insights, it would completely change the way we would look at this music. Now, I have one more interruption. This one. Oh, is this the same?
Yes.
That was the end.
No, it's another.
Okay.
So this is where the interruption comes, but I have to play the beginning of the sonata to understand. So the sonata, it's the K 124, and starts like this. So you see, it's always this whirling, this twirling. It's a dance. So interesting. It's when the second part starts. It's simply a continuation of the former part. So it doesn't seem it hasn't finished yet, the first part. So the second part starts like this. So you see, it stops and then starts again on something which is completely out of key, out of each idea. And then there is a crescendo, and it is back to the beginning with those arpeggios. So, and
was he an opera composer?
Yes. Before, because he was an important opera and oratorio composer, first in Rome, also sacred music composer, because he was the director of Cappella Giulia, so the papal chapel. Then he went to Portugal when he was the musician of the king, so he has to write oratorios, things. Then, and there he also started to teach to Maria Barbara de Braganza, who was the Infanta, the daughter of the king, João V. And Maria Barbara was an extraordinarily talented pupil. She was not only very, very good player, but also good singer and a good composer. And when she married the Prince of Asturias, Fernando, she had to leave everything behind in Portugal, but she only brought with her Scarlatti, who didn't have any official task there, because the young couple was kept quite secluded by the second wife of the King of Spain, which was Isabella Farnese, which had great ideas for her children. So didn't like the young couple, the recently married couple. So they lived for many years in a kind of golden prison in Sevilla. And there Scarlatti didn't have anything to do beyond teaching Maria Barbara and Fernando. So probably he had a lot of time to go around, and for his admission, he went around to listen to the folk music in the
streets,
countryside. And also this is very often this is a bit considered with a certain skepticism, because they say, no, but a musician of that period would never go in the countryside or stay in the popular tavernas. But they forget, or they don't know, that in Naples, we are always be used that all the social classes are mixed together. So, for instance, my professor of composition was the Prince Francesco d'Avalos, descendant of Maria d'Avalos, the unfortunate wife of Carlo Gesualdo da Venosa.
Oh.
He was a prince, and he was a second cousin of Elizabeth of England, now, our Elizabeth. And he lived in a palace like more or less the Capodimonte Palace, same style, but he would speak normally in Neapolitan with his servants, and for him it was completely normal. And normally the aristocracy lived in 17th or 18th century Naples. Aristocracy would live at the first floor, which is not the basement floor, it's the first floor. In the basement would live the small people, and then the bourgeoisie would live in the second, third, and upper stories. So all the social classes were mixed up, and was normally for everybody to talk to everybody. So for a Neapolitan, was normal to go in the countryside, speak with the countrymen and have them singing, or simply stay there while they're singing. More or less what Bartók did at the beginning of 20th century in Hungary and Romania.
Incredible. When you talked about guitar earlier, this is the grouping on guitar chords in the cante. How do you say this?
Cante hondo. Cante hondo, which means a passionate and very deep chant, which is typical of Arab Andalusian folk music. So in the the guitarra spagnola, in the Spanish guitar, there is this technique of the rasqueado, where
Yeah.
you throw all the fingers.
Yeah.
Yes, no, you throw
Oh, right,
this
right, right.
way, all the fingers through the strings. So having them playing them all, also the ones who do not pertain to the chord. And so having very strange chords, very strange harmonies. And so since the folk music, the Andalusian, Arab Andalusian folk music, is much based on the so-called Phrygian tetrachord.
Hit the road, Jack.
Yes. Yes. And normally in the guitar playing, you play the chord, and the bass, it's not always the lowest note, because it depends on how the strings are put. So you have different transposition of this tetrachord. So the normal, where the normal one is called the toque por arriba, which means touching high, in the high position. And here we can see a quite normal chord. But then in transposition becomes always more complicated. For instance, this is toque por medio, which means touching in the middle of the chord, the strings, because it's so. There is the toque por granainas, which is from Granada, which is in B. And then the last one is in F sharp. And a toque por levante. Levante is the east. So you are at Levante in respect of me. So and these examples I took from a book entitled La llave della musica flamenca, the key to flamenco music, because the official flamenco was born at mid 19th century, but all the elements of flamenco, which then will constitute the flamenco, are already present in 16th century, in 17th century popular music. So that's why. But if you if you go to the next example, which should be Gasparini, Scarlatti had studied. It seems that quite sure that he studied with Francesco Gasparini, this great musician of between 17th and 18th century, who taught the sonar pieno, the full playing in the continuo. That's to say that when you want to have more sound, or you want to emphasize the accompaniment, you not only play the chord, but you add other notes also not to the harmony of the harmony. Gasparini says that the dissonant notes are to let go after striking the chord. But and so we see that Scarlatti very often uses this kind of chords, which are almost never written down in the music. One of the few examples are in the sonatas of Lodovico Giustini, the first set of sonatas expressly written for fortepiano. And there is also in some piece of Alessandro Poglietti, a Tuscan composer living in Vienna during the 17th century, and even in the scherzo of the third partita of Bach. At the reprise, he plays a. Sorry, I'm a bit out of tune.
No, it's okay.
And so I think that when Scarlatti heard the Spanish guitar playing, he wasn't amazed at all, because he was already used to the popular music in Naples, also to the sonar pieno of Gasparini. So he uses it at his will, very often to emphasize strong pieces. For instance, the Sonata K 175. No, you don't have.
I was looking for it.
These sonatas, a colleague of mine, Marco Moiraghi, who is co-authored with me a book on Scarlatti, and also he helped Mrs. Fadini with the last 2 volumes of the edition. He says that this sonata is the 18th century rite of spring, because in the second part you see pass like this. So you see, it's absolutely astounding. And I recommend all pianists who are, I hope, listening to this. Don't try to play this accompaniment piano on the piano, because you see on harpsichord they explode. And I think if Scarlatti wrote this, because he was thinking to this harsh effect. So on the piano, one should really be very strong and play them with great accent, because it's the very important part, I think.
Right.
It's not a question of melody here. I heard very, very good performance of this sonata, but always with this left hand put in not second plan, I would say third, fourth level down, and finishing in pianissimo and rallentando, which makes it a very elegant and gallant piece, which is not, because this is a barbarian piece. This is a harsh piece. It's a popular. It's music of the folk, not music of the court.
Right. So this is a Scarlatti example that we do have related to the guitar chords. Number 3.
Number 3 is now it's talking about repetition, what to do in repetitions.
Oh, okay. So
yes, no, this I didn't put in any particular folder.
Okay.
Because we already talked about ornamentation in Scarlatti, and we said that the small ornamentation it's only poorly written in Scarlatti text, like it is in Frescobaldi, it is in Durante, in Greco, and all the other composer. And was normal always, has been normal in every all music, always to have variations at repetitions. Let's think, for instance, to the Fitzwilliam Virginal Book or the Elizabethan music, where the repetition are entirely written out and are entirely varied, really with passages and things. And also Couperin, Bach give us examples of how to embellish repetitions. They do it only in a few dances in their suites, but just because it's a starting point that it's supposed the player has to learn to do it in his way. And also Philip Emanuel Bach wrote sonatas with varied reprise, because he wrote, since not everybody is able to write a new reprise, I wrote it down for you. So it was normal. It was also at the academias, so the concerts in the houses of noble people. It was not one of the things one would look and judge when a player was proving her ability, was how was capable of varying the repetitions. Um, so so the repetition, it's not always be changed by adding some trills, some mordent, some things, but one can also make new variations. Of course, this is a bit more challenging. It's a risk. So I here give an example of K3, esercizi 3, the first part, the way. So I play the original, and then the second time the variation.
Bravo. And that's the big ornamentation we talked about near the
Yes,
beginning of the interview.
yes.
Diminution.
And if we analyze it, it's nothing so strange, because, for instance, well, at the beginning, in the second line, there are just some uh, instead of there. So this is very simple. Then this, I simply play the harmony which is implied. This is a sequence of a 7/6 simply. So I simply add the harmony. And here, just repeating notes. So you see, it's nothing transcendental. It's not. It's simply simply find it. It's already in the music, and of course it should sound Scarlatti. If it sounds something else, of course, so it's a risk. It's a risk, but I always ask my students to take the chance, because the moment they are studying and they are practicing, it's the moment they have to risk and also to err,
Right,
to
right.
make mistakes and to make strange things.
This is incredible. So for all the repeats, you expect your students to come up with something.
Well, of course, not all of them. You know your students, so you know who can you ask. You can't you ask, and you don't have to ask because they are already done before you even talked about it. There are luckily also this kind of people. So here we have the famous Tremulo. We were talking about Tremulo earlier. So, and these are, I already gave you two solutions for two other sonatas. This I didn't do. So this is the Sonata K96. So, Tremulo di sopra, it's not very clear, maybe, but means literally tremulo above. Di sopra means above. A scholar stated that maybe it could be tremulo trill starting by the above note. So, but I don't think it's the case, because I'm an Italian speaker, and really di sopra for me means always in the top part of something, no? Up on the top of the shelf, on the top of the table, the cat is on the table. So really, I would never think it's not does not refer to the upper note, you see. And so this is the the execution I suggest. There can be others, but always this. I must say, tremulo are found more in the first books of sonatas. This indication disappears then, like also disappear an undulating line which follows notes in certain sonatas, which presumably means to hold that note at your will. Sometimes Scarlatti does not indicate rests after notes, and the editor should not feel it, supply them in the text. Should leave exactly, because sometimes the Baroque writing is willingly incomplete, because the player is part of the composition process, composing process. So shouldn't be handicapped by ready-made solutions. And we are back to the problem of editions.
Well, I have to say, I mean, this has to be one of the greatest episodes in terms of breadth and depth and scope of topics. And I have to really extend some thanks to you, Professor Enrico Baiano, for really being gracious with your time and just explaining these things. I learned so many things. I'm going to have to rewatch this in the editing and write down so many different points that I figured out from this. And I think a lot of people will enjoy this. So, parting thoughts. Is there anything we missed that we want to just leave as a closing conclusion to the conversation?
Well, there should be the great the great question of instruments. What instruments to play? There is some purist who says you can't play Scarlatti but on Italian harpsichord or Spanish harpsichords. But if we think that in Spanish courts, several kind of harpsichord were found, also French and German harpsichords, and also Italian Florentine pianos, which the Maria Barbara was very fond of.
So Scarlatti played the piano.
Yes, Cristofori built the first fortepianos as early as 1699. So Scarlatti went to Florence with his father in 1704, 1704. And I'm sure that he was already a young musician and very, very gifted musician, would have seen them. And anyway, in Spain, a large production of Florentine style pianos started already in the 30s of 18th century. So, and Maria Barbara also, once she became the queen, she had fortepianos in all royal residences. So I don't think Scarlatti wouldn't play them, wouldn't be at loss with such an important instrument and so beloved by the queen. And also, in England, there was a cult for Scarlatti, which was already pointed out in the 30s by the famous articles of Newton, the English cult of Domenico Scarlatti. Several English gentlemen went to Madrid and had books of sonatas copied and took them with them back to England. We find a lot of Spanish copy of Scarlatti in the Fitzwilliam Museum and other English museums. And they played a lot of Scarlatti. So I remember Mrs. Fadini saying in a certain ironic way, so in England, about the people who would not play Scarlatti if not on Italian harpsichord. She said once, so in England they would make sure to have a copy of an instrument Scarlatti was playing in Escorial, which of course is not possible in the 18th century England, where the Englishmen thought their harpsichord were by all means the best in Europe, and the Italian harpsichord weren't very good. Burney said that. I don't understand why Italians are good musicians, but actually Italian harpsichord I don't like because they are so harsh and they don't sing like our two manuals instruments. So I think you can also play it on modern piano, provided you learn his language. You speak it correctly, you pronounce it correctly. So it's not, it doesn't change, the music doesn't change its meaning if it's played on different instruments. So you can play it absolutely well on piano. The only problem with modern piano, it is very long sustaining sounds. And keyboard music of an 18th century is written for instruments with a not very long sustaining sound. So the writing is made so to have more or less dense part as regards the sound. And the problem with piano, there is always too long a sound. So pianists are tempted to play all staccato, but also playing everything staccato, it's not the point. It's missing the point, because it's not true that harpsichord cannot sing and cannot play legato. So it's quite a task, because sometimes the sounds of the instruments goes against goes versus the intention of the musical writing. So the pianist has a very difficult a task about that.
Right. Well,
But they
go ahead.
nevertheless have to try.
What do you think? Let me get your opinion. I asked you about Glenn Gould and last time. What do you think of pianists like Horowitz doing Scarlatti? Have you heard his? I mean, I'm sure you've heard his recordings. What do you make of that?
I do love it. And Horowitz is one of my models in interpretation. So, of course, not all what he did can be considered stylistically correct, but who cares? It's and actually he had some lesson with Kirkpatrick before recording those sonatas, so he wasn't unaware of a lot of problems, and I love his interpretation. Also, I loved the 2 CDs recorded by Mikhail Pletnyov, which not only has an interpretation out of the cliché you normally hear from pianists, but also made a very personal choice of sonatas which you never heard played by pianists. So it's very interesting because Pletnyov, I think, it's one of the most important musicians of our time.
So, final question, Enrico. Well, really, it's just can you give people an update of the rest of the year? What do you have planned, and any events and concerts you have for the future?
Yes, I just finished a madly busy period. I'm really tired up. Now I've got a masterclass and a concert in the north of Italy, where there is an international organ academy in Smarano, where they also have a harpsichord course. Then during summer, I'll have some concert with a group of 4 percussion players who will play xylophone and marimbas, and we'll do the preludes and fugues from Well-Tempered Clavier. I'll play, of course, the original, and they will play modern rethinking from contemporary composers of the same pieces. Then I play in Rome. I have a concert just with a program of Neapolitan early composers I showed at the beginning. I also already played this year in Spain. Then in November, there is another concert. Yes, a concert in Rome with the same program. Then in the start of 2023, I should record Bach's toccatas. And then there will be other master classes, but all in Italy. And other concert still to be confirmed.
Wonderful. Well, what can I say? One of the best harpsichordists in the world today. Thank you so much, Professor Enrico Baiano. It's been a real pleasure. And please, let's do this again in the near future.
Yes, with pleasure. I look forward to stay again here with you.
Wonderful. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.